Hey guys, back with a new video log, BioLayne video log. What is it? 7 now. Wow, lucky number 7. Very cool. Glad to see we've gotten such a great response from the previous video logs. I enjoy doing them, enjoy hearing from you guys, and you know, I think I'm going to start here in the future having some Q&As. So you guys send them some questions and I'll answer them on here. But today I'm actually going to go back to another video log, the number 5, Think for Yourself. That got quite the reaction, which I was happy about. I wanted a lot of people to really, really think about that and what I was trying to convey there. Unfortunately, not everyone takes being challenged the same way. I had several of the groups that I mentioned in there, and you notice I was never insulting to anyone. At least I don't think I was anyway. I certainly tried not to be. I had some CrossFit people kind of send me angry emails, and but in particular, intermittent fasting. Now I got some people who were in intermittent fasting who actually sent me really nice emails, and so they were very interested in what I had to say, and they took that information and even if they didn't agree with it, they used it and they took that input and they applied it towards themselves. So that was nice to see. There was also some people who got really angry, and I didn't quite understand that. And I think from what I've seen, they were angry about 3 things. 1, that video log. 2, my presentation at the ISSN, which you can also see on my YouTube channel. It's the ISSN presentation that I gave on protein distribution, my research on protein distribution. They seemed angry about that, which I don't understand. I never actually mentioned intermittent fasting. Data is what it is. And 3, there was not really an interview, but a gal named Zoe Lee. She has a fitness website, very smart young gal, and she wrote an article about intermittent fasting, and she wanted my input, so she asked me some questions about it, and I gave my opinion. And I didn't say, I've never said intermittent fasting sucks. I've never said you can't get results with it. What I said was, and please listen carefully for those of you who have been angry, what I said was that there were certain things I liked about it, and there was certain things, the protein distribution aspect of it, that I didn't consider optimal for maximizing muscle mass. Now, if you're a competitor, if you're not a competitor, and you never want to be, on a bodybuilding stage, or you just want to look good or whatever, and intermittent fasting is something you can follow and you get results from that, awesome. Do it. Go for it. I think for most people, the best diet is the one that they can follow and be consistent with. I think that is the best thing. Again, never said any personal insults towards the people who kind of came up with this or the protocol itself, just gave my input. I got quite the level of insults flung at me, which was very interesting to see, including from some people who you'd really expect more professionalism from. And so did Zoe, actually. She, very disturbing to see how people came after her. Just lack of professionalism. I mean, some people, I guess, are just very insecure about, what they follow. And so anything that kind of challenges that, they get very angry about. And so I had people calling for me to debate about intermittent fasting and all this stuff. And now I've kind of already given my thoughts on it. And I want to be really clear about something. And that's, I'm really happy to debate with adults. Like Alan Oregon, Sean Wells, Dana Hauser, Patrick Arnold, Scott Connolly, Dr. Scott Connolly, I've had debates with all these guys. And we disagree on a lot of stuff. And at the end of it, nobody slings insults. Nobody gets ticked off. There's no, tantrums flying or anything. It's just, oh, I see your point. I disagree based on this research. And the other person says, well, I see your point based on this. I see your point, but based on this research, I disagree with you. And we go, okay. That's science. Science is not black and white. It's open to interpretation. So, I think it's ridiculous that, some people think they've got everything all figured out. It fits nice and neat into all these boxes, and that, one protocol is the best for everybody. That's just asinine, and it's arrogant. So, happy to debate with adults. That's fun for me. I enjoy that. I've been at academic conferences like experimental biology where I'm presenting my research in front of 200-300 professors and science writers and other PhD students, and getting challenged with questions and debating back and forth about the research and the literature, and that's fun. I've had people who are challenging me with questions, and later we'll go out and grab a bite to eat and get a drink together, and talk about it. There's no hard feelings with that. I mean, it's not always the case. Some people do take, some data personally. But for the most part, if you've gotten to that level, you don't mind being challenged. If you're confident in your knowledge, you actually enjoy it. It's fine. So, happy to debate with adults. Happy to debate with adults. What I'm not going to do is get into a pissing match with children throwing a temper tantrum. That's what I'm not going to do, okay? When somebody comes at me with personal insults, when I was 20 years old, 25 years old, I would sit there and bitch back and forth with them and get into those pissing matches. And what I found is that nobody comes out of those looking good. Mark Twain once said, "Don't argue with a fool. From a distance, people can't tell who the fool is." Dave Ramsey says, "Don't argue with an idiot. They'll drag you down to their level and beat you with experience." So, happy to debate with adults, not going to debate with children throwing temper tantrums. Because it's not a debate. It's an argument. It's name calling. It's trudging each other through the mud. Just not going to happen. That's just not something I want to be involved in. I want to be involved in constructive things. Now, am I guilty of, getting in those arguments previously? Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, you learn from experience. You learn that it just makes yourself look worse, because there's no way to reason with people who are being unreasonable. There's no way to reason with people who are being unreasonable. So, that said, there was actually some people who brought up some very interesting points based on my data. And I think it'd be beneficial for me to share those with you. In fact, on I'm not going to rehash my presentation that I gave on the ISSN about protein distribution. You guys can watch that. But essentially what we showed was that you can't make up for a lack of protein at one time of the day by eating a massive amount of protein another time of the day. And that's because you have you have a threshold for each meal, a certain amount of protein you have to get in order to initiate muscle protein synthesis. And that's, anywhere from 20 to 40 grams depending on the protein source and depending on the person's age and their weight and these different factors. But there's also an anabolic cap, okay? If you eat 40 grams or 50 grams of protein, you're not going to get a bigger response by eating 80 to 100 grams of protein. And we've shown data looking at that. Dr. Stuart Phillips has shown data demonstrating that. I think Van Loon has shown data demonstrating that. There's definitely an anabolic cap to a meal. And so, if you don't get enough protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis at one meal, just trying to make it up at another meal, you're not going to get that response. And also the time course of protein synthesis is a truncated response. It's only about 3 hours, regardless of intake. And so in muscle, that is, whole body protein synthesis will run for a more extended period of time. But that's not muscle, that's the rest of the body. So again, that's kind of the point there. So one person brought up a study that was done that showed that they used it to kind of juxtapose my research to say that, you know, maybe you're mistaken on this, because look at this study. And this was a study done by Arnauld in France, I believe. They're in Dardave's lab. And this is very, very, I don't want to call them an old school type of thinking protein group, because they do great research. But they do tend to think a little bit more the nitrogen balance style, whole body protein synthesis style. But nonetheless, they do great research. And they did a study looking at elderly women, and they fed them either protein evenly distributed over 4 meals, or bolused, or not bolused, or unevenly distributed, where they gave low protein throughout the day and then a big protein dose at night for dinner, and with total protein between the two groups being equal. And what they showed was that at the end of the experiment, I think it was maybe 3 weeks or 6 weeks. I apologize for not knowing offhand, but it was a few weeks. And at the end of the experiment, the women that were consuming the unevenly distributed protein had better nitrogen balance and better whole body protein synthesis. And so they kind of said, well, Layne, this is contrary to your data, where we showed that evenly distributing protein is better than unevenly distributed. Well, this is where it's dangerous to be kind of an abstract scientist, where you're only looking at abstracts and you're looking at conclusions and you're not actually looking at the data and how the experiment's designed. That experiment, one, the outcomes aren't really what you're wanting to find. Nitrogen balance and whole body protein synthesis aren't muscle protein synthesis. Nitrogen balance is much more heavily influenced by gut tissue turnover than it is by muscle protein turnover. Your muscle protein turnover is about 1% per day. That's the rate. About 1% of it turns over per day. Whereas your gut tissues, like your intestine and your liver, turn over 40, 50, 60% per day. So it's a massive amount of turnover. So any alterations in whole body protein synthesis and nitrogen balance are tend to be more of a reflection of gut tissue turnover. But let's just say for the sake of argument that those outcome measures do reflect muscle. The reason they found what they found, in my opinion, is because their total protein intake was 60 grams a day for these women. So in the unevenly distributed group, they were getting like 4 grams of protein over their first 3 meals, and then 48 grams of protein at their last meal. And in the evenly distributed group, they were getting 15 grams of protein at every single meal. Well, based on our data, that 15 grams of protein at each meal, none of those meals are probably going to be enough to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So, especially in elderly women, because as you age, you actually get kind of resistant to the anabolic effects of amino acids, and you need more protein intake to stimulate the same amount of muscle protein synthesis. I believe Robert Wolf's lab has shown that, as well as a few other labs. Katsanos is another paper that showed that. So you need more total protein. So that 15 grams at those 4 meals to make up the 60 grams per day is not going to be enough to stimulate muscle protein synthesis at any of those time points, in my opinion. Whereas the group getting the unevenly distributed protein, they're getting low protein throughout the day, so they're not getting a stimulation, obviously, at the meals where they're getting 4 grams of protein. But then at the big, massive meal of 48 grams of protein, they're definitely getting a response. They're definitely going to get an increase in muscle protein synthesis. So what you're really looking at is 1 stimulation of muscle protein synthesis per day versus 0. So yes, they are going to find better outcomes with that. In my opinion, if they had made the total protein intake around 100 grams, where you're looking at, like like 7 grams, 8 grams per meal, and then a big meal of like 70 grams in the unevenly distributed group, versus having 25 grams at all the 4 meals. Now you're probably going to get a stimulation of muscle protein synthesis in each one of those 25 gram protein meals. So now you're going to be looking at 4 doses, 4 stimulations of muscle protein synthesis versus the 1. And I think you're going to find a better response in that case. So again, you can't, it doesn't operate in a vacuum. You really have to look at how an experiment was set up and what the actual outcome measures were. Did it actually answer your question? So it was a really good point that this person brought up, and so I thought it would be beneficial for you guys that we discuss it. And so that's my opinion on why that paper kind of showed different results than mine. It's because the total protein intake wasn't great enough in the evenly distributed group to get a stimulation at any one of the meals, and if it had been higher, I think the evenly distributed group would have had much better results. And again, you know, that's what I enjoy. That's what I enjoy doing. You know, think for yourself. Look at these experiments. Ask yourself, don't just read the conclusion. You know, the conclusion of an experiment and say, oh, okay. And what I see a lot that drives me nuts is cherry picking. You know, we can't present both sides of the story. We have to just totally be biased, you know. So when a study comes out that the conclusion is favorable to what you believe, all of a sudden that's the end-all be-all study, and no other studies matter. And when a study comes out with a conclusion that is against what you believe, you have to trash that study. You know, it wasn't done right. It was funded by this group. It was done in rats, so it doesn't matter. Ridiculous. And I've already discussed why. You know, that's not a valid criticism. So again, you know, keep in mind that science isn't black and white. You have to understand that everything is open for interpretation. And you have to think for yourself. You have to reason for yourself. And you have to be reasonable and not be upset when somebody challenges you. Always be willing to learn. Always try to look at things objectively. It's not always easy, like I've said. I'll fully admit I have my biases. But I try to be honest about them. I try to be upfront about them. And I try not to let them get in the way of me learning more. So, I realize that was a little bit of rambling, but I hope you guys got something out of it. I think some of those points are important. Put a little bit of, you know, science and information in there. And then, you know, kind of re-emphasizing, you know, how to be, you know, how to keep your mind open, and also, you know, acting like a professional, you know, being reasonable, you know, and especially how to debate. Let me tell you what, you know, if you most scientists, you know, these guys out there who are well known, who are big time scientists, they're happy to, you know, answer questions and these sorts of things. I see Dr. Stuart Phillips, who's one of the foremost experts in protein in the world, answering questions on Twitter. You can follow him at MackinProf, MackinProf, and I highly recommend that. And he answers questions from anybody, you know. But if you're going to go on there and you disagree with his research and you go on there and insult him, I promise you, you're not going to get a reply, you know. So be reasonable. Even if you disagree, act like an adult. Don't act like a child. And we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks.